It's cool.
I invite you to stand for the reading of the Gospel. The lesson today comes from Matthew 28, verses 1 through 10. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake. For an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. For he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. When we lived in Indianapolis, I had the privilege to be able to sing with a chorus with the Indianapolis Opera. I was a member of that for about 10 years, and I got to sing in 19 productions as part of the chorus. It's a wonderful experience to find yourself surrounded by all those great singers and just belting it out in the midst of this large stage. For me, I was not a voice major. Diane can tell you I barely can read music. But I love to sing, and I love to be with those folks who are indeed voice majors. We had some people who had been at IU and other places that just wonderful voices, and it's such a treat to sing in those beautiful aria, or those beautiful chorus parts in Italian or in French. It was wonderful to sing as a part of an ensemble. And then on my last opera, I got my big break. It was Fanciulla del West. It was by Puccini, the Girl of the Golden West. And I was asked to step out of the chorus and to do a separate character, to perform as a separate character and have a solo. My picture even made it to the program. But I should put this in context. My solo was all of 19 notes. It did involve a wardrobe change, but my character didn't even have a name. In the bulletin, in the program, it's just listed as the postman, the il postiglione. It was a bit part, but it was my bit, and I delivered it with as much passion as I could. I wouldn't blame you if when you read the Gospels from beginning to end, you notice all the bit parts in those stories. Characters who come in and out of Jesus' life, people whom Jesus healed, taught, helped. All these people come in and out. Sometimes we don't even know their names. We know some names. We know the disciples' names, some of whom are mentioned more than other times. But in today's passage, none of those headliners are there. None of the ones who get to sing solos are there. Instead, center stage are two women in the retelling of this story, Mary Magdalene and another Mary who was also a follower, a disciple. Mary Magdalene and the other women were with Jesus throughout his ministry, and they make it to center stage in this story because they played a significant role. Both of these characters, if this had been an opera, would have been listed in the program, and I'm sure Mary Magdalene would have had her picture in it. Mary Magdalene, for me, is of special interest in this story. She rises among the other disciples in her role and plays a key role, a key part in the life and ministry of Jesus. You may recall last Sunday we read the passage where Jesus was killed. In that passage, there was a little mention at the end that some women had been nearby witnessing the crucifixion from a distance. Mary Magdalene was among them. The women were distraught, but they wanted to be sure to be present. They watched what had happened. These were women who had been followers and key supporters of Jesus from the very beginning. Now, sometimes the women are referred to in contexts of maybe they were married to this person or they were the mother of this person, but not Mary Magdalene. She is referred to only as herself. And she is willing to shed some societal boundaries because she traveled with Jesus, as did the other women. She is referred to instead in terms of her faithfulness, in terms of her gratitude for Jesus healing her, and in terms of her courage. What we get to find out is that these women were the first to invest in this ministry of Jesus. And by investing, I mean literally, they paid the bills. They were the women who supported and empowered that ministry that Jesus started in Galilee. And when you think about that, it's hard to overstate this. This is a patriarchal society. And here were the women. The women were the ones that were making it possible with their own resources, out of their own purses. And it was a large operation. It was not just the disciples. It was families. It was people who were part of it. They risked how society would perceive them by following Jesus and by putting of themselves into this effort. And after all of that they had done, now here was Jesus in that whirlwind week, having been crucified. And so even as Jesus was being buried, these were the women who would not desert him. They wanted to be nearby to witness everything. They knew where Jesus was buried. They had been the first one to support him. They'd be the last ones to see his lifeless body going into the tomb. And so on the third day, they were the first back at the tomb. Early that first Easter morning, they wanted to go to the tomb, to mourn, to reminisce. But that's when the shock comes. And they get to be the first ones to see the tomb empty. Think about it. At the sight of the angel coming down, the Roman guards faint. And the women stand in awe, but they stand. They were the first ones then to see the risen Jesus. They were the first ones to proclaim the good news that Jesus was alive. It seems fitting that these faithful, compassionate, and generous women get to be first. They get to be the first evangelists to proclaim the good news. It may be tempting for you and I to think that in the history of faith, which God writes every day through us and around us, that somehow the really important ones in that story are the headliners. We might think of names like Martin Luther King Jr., like Mother Teresa, Desmond Tutu, others around the world. The big characters, the ones who get to deliver the big lines. But Mary Magdalene, in her brief appearances in the gospel narrative, highlights how each one of us plays a significant role in the good news that God shares with us today. In our recent trip to Palestine, I met a woman whose life and whose story reminds me so much of Mary Magdalene. Lila is her name. Lila is a merchant in the city of Hebron in the West Bank. She is married. She has 6 children. She's an observant Muslim woman living in a city that has suffered greatly under the Israeli military occupation. Life for merchants in Hebron is very tough. The occupation has reduced the tourist traffic down to a trickle. The occupation has placed terrible burdens on everyday life, especially for those whose shops are right in the old city, the oldest part of town. But Lila is a force of nature. She is an astute businesswoman. She is a leader in the Hebron Women's Cooperative. And that cooperative makes and sells these wonderfully embroidered shawls and bags and dresses and pillowcases. And daily, she defies not only the occupation, literally by remaining in the city and not wanting to be run off, but she bucks some of her culture's expectations for women by being a business leader. She's observant in her faith, but challenges antiquated gender restrictions and encourages other women in the cooperative to be strong and to be independent. It's risky to upset the order of society, and so these are brave women. Lila plays a key role in her family and in the lives of the women who provide for their own families through the income they make by selling the goods that they make. Lila and Mary Magdalene remind me of the power that we can harness with faith and courage. And see, Jesus knew what he had, and Jesus knew what he was doing when he encouraged Mary Magdalene, whom he had met, whom he had healed. She was a wonderful resource to the community where she lived. It's kind of no surprise, though, when Charlotte read the passage from Acts, when you hear Peter in a patriarchal society almost downplaying the role that the women played. Even though Jesus had shattered barriers. Here we have, it's annoying to have Peter sort of explaining the story of the life of Jesus and his ministry and completely just overlooking and skipping over the part that the women played. So even if forces collude to minimize the work of those women who were there first, even if in our lives we have forces that collude to minimize our work, our role, our part is more than a bit part. For we live in this community and we work to share God's love in tangible ways around us. And so whether we live in a position of privilege or whether we struggle to make ends meet, we face pressure when we seek to buck the system, when God is asking us to stand up for justice and for peace. And yet you know the ones who have been first at doing that. You know who has stood up first. Whether the traditions of the church build us up or whether they hem us in, we face pressure not to make some big changes perhaps when God is asking us in fact to expand our faith and our expression of faith. And we know the first ones who have been there to risk and express that faith in new ways. And so we get to honor and learn from those who have been there first. Our very own Mary Magdalenes, our very own Lilas. And we get to be emboldened by them. And we get to take risks because they took a risk first. And so thanks be to God for those who have been first in our lives, who've made it possible for us to be next, who've taught us, who've encouraged us, and who empower us to share in new ways the impact that the good news has in our lives. As together we can proclaim, Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen.